Hi, this is Alan Zundel with Political Dharma. This is a follow-up to my previous episode in which I covered the leading minor party candidates debating at the Free and Equal Foundation's sponsored debate last Friday. That first episode, I covered mostly their takes on domestic issues, I think entirely. Today, I'm going to focus more on what they had to say about foreign policy in particular. So just like the last episode, I edited this down to try to make it shorter, even though with inserting my own commentary in it, the previous episode got a lot longer than I intended it to do. So I'm going to try to limit my commentary because I don't have a lot to add to what I already said in that episode. Where you do hear a beep, that's where I cut something out of the middle of a speaker's comments. And where you don't hear a beep, but there's a transition from one speaker to another, you can clearly hear the transition through the change of voice, but I may have cut some. I usually have cut a little out of the beginning or end of what that speaker has to say. So there is some editing. I hope I was faithful to their comments in general. This first question that they were presented with on foreign policy had to do with how they would help keep peace and avoid nuclear war. So let's hear what they had to say. Again, this is what order were they appearing in? This is Randall Terry of the Constitution Party, the official nominee of the party. Chase Oliver, the nominee of the Libertarian Party, and Jill Stein, who looks like she's going to be the nominee of the Green Party.
Discussing whether or not we exit ourselves from the entanglement of NATO is a valid discussion. It is a valid discussion. But I am with President Reagan on this one. Peace through strength. Peace through strength. The way you keep a nuclear war from happening is to make the enemy believe that this would be a disaster for you to attack us. And then full steam ahead with creating an Iron Dome over the United States of America. I believe in the ability to shoot down missiles from the sky and not kill our people in our cities.
So as Commander-in-Chief, the first thing I'm going to do is signaling that we're removing our military footprint from every single continent. We are not the world's police. It is not our job to have to fight wars all over the world. It is not our job to exacerbate conflict in the world. In fact, the best way that we can promote peace is through free trade, free markets, and actually engaging in free commerce and voluntary exchange with nations around the world. Because if I'm selling something to you or I'm buying something from you, I don't have a vested interest in shooting at you. And that's the way we change this. Right now, we've been exporting our values around the world with the bomb, the bullet, and the drone. And it has led to further tension against the United States. It will eventually, as Ron Paul and others have said in the past, it will lead to blowback if we continue this. We have to end the war machine and promote peace through actually saying we are not going to be dropping bombs on your kids anymore.
So we currently have a foreign policy based on militarism. There's a name that the Pentagon gives to its military policy called full spectrum dominance. It's sort of peace through strength taken to the nth degree, which is that the U.S. shall dominate all potential spheres of conflict, all competition across the world in all possible domains, in the sky, on the land, on the sea surface, under the sea, in cyberspace, and so on. And this has led to so many conflicts where we are basically seeking to dominate. And we see now ourselves really on the verge of potentially nuclear conflicts in 3 areas around the world. And we're now moving up this escalation ladder right now in both Ukraine and in Israel, which is absolutely terrifying.
The issue is peace and justice. You can have peace and you can have tyranny. So there is such a thing as just war. And there are times where we have to fight. We have to kill people. World War II was a just war. And part of the problem with people who just want to rail against war is that they're perfectly content to let other people have the heel of oppression on the back of their neck as long as it's not on our neck. Part of the problem that we've had is that our foreign policy is not based upon human rights. It's based upon deep water ports and on oil.
So I would argue against the notion that any war that we're engaging in right now is a just war, because these aren't wars that are, first off, not declared by Congress. They're not legal wars. They're not wars that are actual wars. They're military conflicts. But secondly, these aren't just wars that are fighting out of the altruistic nature of wanting to help people around the world. These are wars for profit. These are wars that profit a military-industrial complex that makes money by killing people all over the world. And we allow our tax code and our budget to fund these things. Frankly, Boeing, you can build something else. Raytheon, you can make something else other than bombs. I am so sick and tired of saying we have to kill people around the world to make our economy strong because we make weapons components in these random congressional districts.
It's not only that there's profiteering off of death, but this is what's driving the wars in the first place. That you have the war contractors who are lobbying, who are providing campaign contributions, who are providing jobs, and they're basically ginning up a war industry. And the minute you end one, like when we withdrew from Afghanistan, there was supposed to be a peace dividend, but what happened? Then suddenly we were in Ukraine. Ukraine for really no good reason at all, nothing that benefited the US. So this is basically a foreign policy being driven by, as Dwight Eisenhower said, by the military-industrial complex that is making money by creating war, and we need to stop it.
Well, as you heard in their answers, Jill Stein and Chase Oliver seem to be more in sync on their views about this. Both of them felt that our involvement in other countries was causing a lot of these disruption in peace, such as in Israel or in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And they had a little bit different takes on what to do about this. Chase Oliver not only wanted to get the United States out of wars like this and prevent us from intervening in the affairs of other countries so much, but he thought that by promoting free trade between nations, it would also promote free exchange of communications, and we could have a more peaceful building up of the economy that would benefit everybody. So very much promoting this idea of free market capitalism between the nations, getting rid of things like, even though he didn't specify this, getting rid of tariffs and barriers to trade. With Jill Stein, she agreed with him that the United States shouldn't be involved in this, that the United States is involved in promoting wars abroad for various reasons, but we shouldn't be. And her view was that really what it was is lobbyists from the military-industrial complex were the problem, and that by taking the power of government away from these lobbyists and corporations and putting it back in the hands of ordinary people, we could prevent and end these types of wars. Now, Randall Terry was different in the sense that he emphasized that he thought there is a need for a strong military force, and that there is such a thing as just wars, and he does regard at least the Israeli conflict, the Israeli attack on Hamas, and the subsequent tragedy for the Gazans who live there as a just war. So they somewhat similar, the Libertarian and the Green, but very different on the part of the take on the part of the Constitution Party candidate. The next segment, they were asked specifically about what to do about what they think about lobbying on behalf of foreign governments by groups like AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And in their answers to this, they segued into their beliefs about the war of Israel against Hamas in Gaza and the plight of the Palestinians there. So let's hear how they saw these issues.
And unfortunately, because of the inordinate amount of money, I think it's $100 million that AIPAC is spending in this election, we do not have an adequate discussion and a debate because it's become politically toxic to even speak out about this critical war that is murdering. It's not only some 38,000 people who've been killed, according to the journal The Lancet that just published last week, it's more like 180-some thousand that are actually being killed in this war. It should be stopped immediately. Joe Biden can do that with a phone call to Bibi Netanyahu.
Thank you.
There's no chance in heaven or hell that Joe Biden could stop the war with one phone call to Netanyahu. Not a chance. It's not possible. But I digress. Should foreign lobby groups be allowed to donate to campaigns? Yeah, if we want to self-destruct, I think it's a great idea. No, of course not. But there's an overarching issue here, and that is that money has so utterly, completely corrupted our system of government, we may never recover from it. We are being controlled and manipulated by a handful of billionaires right now.
So I'm going to be frank and honest. Powerful interests have always controlled governments from the beginning of time. This is why government is immoral and why we should strike government down as much as possible. Yeah! But the truth is money is speech. And it is. You have the right to spend your money and try to influence people as much as you want to. But what I want to see is full transparency of who's putting that money and where it's going to. So if we should change anything, we should make the process more transparent to see who is buying and trading our congresspeople. Now, when it comes to AIPAC, I want them to be just as transparently exposed as much as anyone else. Because they are. They, like every other lobbying group, are trying to purchase influence via money in the electoral process. Doesn't always work, though. We actually are sitting right here on a stage with somebody who had a lot of AIPAC money thrown against him. His two primary opponents got so much AIPAC money, he was outspent a lot. But the people in his community knew who he was. They knew exactly where he stood, and they stood by him for that. Money does not have to equal success in this country.
I just want to respond to Randall's statement that Joe Biden could not shut down this war. And he has enormous power in making that phone call, just like Ronald Reagan did when he told Israel to stop its invasion of Lebanon and stop the missile strikes in Lebanon in the 1980s. The war was stopped that day. Dwight Eisenhower did the same thing in the 1960s, speaking to Israel and Britain and France, who were all invading Egypt. He made the call. And the reason that Israel respects that call is because Israel is completely dependent on U.S. weapons and U.S. dollars.
First of all, this is not the 1980s and it's not the 1950s. And what Israel is enduring from Islamic terrorist attacks is something that they intend to deal with, and for just cause. It's true. Islam, the philosophy and the creeds and the law, Sharia law of Islam, is the greatest threat to human liberty on the face of the earth. It dwarfs communism. It dwarfs communism.
Israel has a right to respond to a terrorist attack. I think if that happened in our neighborhoods, any of us would want us to respond to. But it's the nature of the response that so many people across this country are having a problem with. It should not cost tens of thousands of innocent people to seek justice for those who were killed on October 7th. That is not a just war. That is not a just action. It should be far more surgical if you're going to go after those who perpetrated October the 7th. But my question is how many dead babies is it worth to justify October 7th? How many dead children are there in Gaza right now that you feel is justified on the actions of what happened? I feel that one child being killed in an airstrike is too many. And here's the truth of it. I want the hostages released. I want to see hostages released. But what I also want to see is Israel to stop airstriking where the hostages are likely to be, because that will kill them. I would like to see kids stop being bombed. I would like to see true peace, and it does not come from capitulation to Israel's wishes and Netanyahu's government.
All right, on this issue was similar for each of them along the lines of their previous answers. With Chase Oliver, he's less interested in government regulation of anything like lobbying, but he believes that if we simply give people more information about where the money is coming from and who it's going to, that voters will be able to make decisions about who to put in office that are independent of these influences. Jill Stein seeing lobbying on behalf of other governments, in particular, as a big problem, and the war of Israel against Hamas in Gaza as a genocide. Randall Terry taking exception to that, having more the sense that, you know, there are just wars and there's times where the Americans need to intervene in other conflicts on the right side of the conflict. So he had a different take on that. Oliver and Stein more so seeing the United States interventions in other countries in military conflicts over the last half century as being not in the interest of the United States, but purely in the interest of corporations, military-industrial complex, and folks like that. So the next segment, they started out by being asked about child sex trafficking and what they would do about it, but it segued into what to do about the border in general. And so since this has something to do with our relations with people from other countries trying to get here, I thought it fit well into foreign policy. And let's hear what they had to say about this.
Deal with the southern border. Deal with the southern border. That's where so much of this is happening. We've got a border where they know that children are being brought in. It's abominable, it's treacherous, it's hideous. And the people who are in charge, who want cheap labor for our crops or for our, standing outside of Home Depot, our southern border is the fountain of a huge portion of the child sex trafficking. But I'm going to go one step further. All that you see happening, and I agree with you that the loss of life in Gaza is horrifying. So I do not support that. But all that we see happening, the hostility toward children, the animosity, look at the Democrat Party platform. They want to kill babies up to the day of birth. They want to tell children that here's a condom, here's the pill, here's some pornography. You've had sex education. Oh, little boy, you want to cut off your penis and become a girl? We'll do that. Little girl, you want to cut off your mammary glands and become a boy? We'll help you do that. This is a war on children.
So how do we put an end to the child sex trafficking epidemic in the United States? We put law enforcement on the job. We arrest those, we take those out of society, we remove them from our society. But why and how can we do that? How can we do that? Well, we do that by removing the victimless crimes that don't need to be being prosecuted against in the first place. Because there's only so many hours in the day for law enforcement. And I would rather them focus on crimes of sex abuse of children or actual harm, physical abuse, force, fraud, coercion, theft, or violence. Those are the things I want police to be focusing on. But right now we have police focusing on all sorts of stupid regulations, trying to legislate and decide what you do peacefully in your own home as an adult with what you ingest or any other things, the failed war on drugs. And so much of what we do is we live in an over-criminalized society that makes it hard for police to actually put their eye on the ball on the real violence that's occurring, the real victims that are being persecuted against. And then when we talk about the border, yes, we need to solve the border crisis. We need to make it easier for peaceful people to come in here and do those jobs and get hired by Randall outside of Home Depot. We need to make it easier for people to come here and work, because when we allow people to come here who are peacefully to come through a process that works, we can then put our eye on the ball with the people who are trying to traffic people across our border for the purposes of labor or sexual exploitation.
If we want to address the crisis of immigration, the most important thing we can do is to stop causing it in the first place by regime change, operations, by overturning governments, by upending democracies through corporate domination in the economies. And this is the kind of interference in government south of the border that is creating the poverty and the chaos, the drug wars creating the violence and so on, that is driving so many people into poverty and misery in those countries, often leading to sex trafficking and families that are not capable of caring for their children, that are immersed in poverty and cannot provide their children with a decent life. So yes, we can deal with sex trafficking through enforcement. We can also deal with our role in creating the conditions that lead to this terrible thing in the first place.
Right now, there are men and women sitting in federal prison for years whose crime was they did a peaceful sit-in at an abortion clinic of a man who kills babies up till the day of birth in Washington, D.C. We have FBI agents that were pulled off of sex trafficking cases and child pornography cases and put on task force to go after peaceful pro-lifers because of this godless Democrat Party.
Here are differences a bit starker. Chase Oliver feeling like we could put more resources into preventing crimes at the border, such as child sex trafficking, by shifting resources from victimless crimes like using drugs in the privacy of your own home, and probably in other areas as well. As an openly gay person, I'm sure he's aware of the history of using law enforcement to persecute gay people, whatever they were doing in their own homes as well. Jill Stein seeing the problem of how the United States is creating this crisis by intervening in countries south of the border and making it impossible for people to live there in safety and dignity, that by propping up oppressive military regimes or facilitating corporate exploitation of resources of other countries and using their labor at a very cheap price, and facilitating climate change, which makes farming so much difficult south of the border because of drought, that we were facilitating this. And so in order to address problems at the border, we have to stop making problems south of the border worse, and in other countries as well, I think she would say. Randall Terry agreed with Chase Oliver about shifting law enforcement resources, and he used an anecdote about how law enforcement was being used to prosecute peaceful protesters against abortion, where they could have used those to go investigate and stop child sex trafficking. So he saw this as part of an anti-child agenda on part of the Democratic Party. Next segment, they're going to be talking about the war powers of the president, and I included pieces from the next part of the debate, which was about presidential immunity from alleged crimes committed while in office. So they went together kind of well. So let's hear what they had to say about each of these.
There's times where you have to move quickly. So I believe that Congress needs to declare war, but the president, as the commander-in-chief, if he needs to move people in the night to deal with something, then he has to do it. So there you have it.
I would like to see Congress declare any war to which we enter ourselves into. Now, Randall says you're right. We are allowed to protect ourselves from some sort of invasion or something that happens suddenly. But when it comes to us actually attacking someone else, none of that needs to be bypassing Congress. Congress needs to declare when we send our people to war, because that is what the Constitution demands that they be doing. And so anything outside of that is an undeclared war, and in my opinion, an unconstitutional war. And so we haven't fought a constitutional war, not even in my lifetime, but not since World War II have we had a formally declared war in this country. How many thousands of veterans are dead due to unconstitutional, undeclared wars? How many victims have been made through violence or displacement around the world due to undeclared wars from the United States? And how many military-industrial complex people are freaking filthy rich because of the undeclared wars in this country? That is a stain on our national heritage.
I agree with both gentlemen here that the president does have the authority in an emergency situation to activate the armed forces for a limited period of time. I don't recall whether it's 4 weeks or
60
something.
days.
60 days. Okay. So yes, the president can do it, but I agree that we have gone so far in the direction of conducting illegal wars. It begs for resistance to going down that path further. We have conducted regime change operations in about 70 or 80 nations since the Second World War.
I think if I'm President of the United States, I should be undergoing the same criminal code as anybody else, that if I do something wrong, it doesn't matter whether I'm doing it in my official capacity or unofficial capacity. A crime is a crime is a crime. No one should be above the law. And when we have this presumed immunity for the executive branch, we are giving license to do so many terrible things and to say, well, that was in the auspices of my official capacity. I guess you're going to have to take me to court, and if you want to try to overturn that or change that. That's not the way we need to be operating in this country.
This is not a monarchy. This is a democracy or a republic, but we are all accountable to the law. No one is above the law. And it's an invitation to fraud, to abuse, to theft, to whatever, to war crimes, to, the Supreme Court decision made a very fuzzy distinction between what are core functions of the presidency and what are not. But even if you just limited this ability to defy the law to even core functions, well, that's things like conducting war. And the president cannot conduct illegal wars, and be a war criminal. It's giving absolute license for the most terrible things.
This whole question is designed to completely undermine our republic and make it come unglued. So now, because the president is involved in declaring war or leading troops into battle, he could be a war criminal in another country. This is insanity, people. There are things that the president does in the official capacity of his duty that we will never know about. I mean, we want transparency, but if he has to, or if he chooses to authorize a military strike with cruise missiles like Bill Clinton did, and sometimes they hit the target and sometimes they miss it, and then the civilians are killed, are we going to say that Bill Clinton should be brought up as a war criminal?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay, here again, Chase Oliver, the Libertarian, and Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, had a little more in common than they did with Randall Terry. Now, where they all felt the president needed powers to be able to act quickly without the consent of Congress in cases where there was an immediate threat to the United States, they both felt that that power had been abused to a large extent, and that in the last half century, our military inventions have not been to protect the United States, but rather to serve the interests of private parties, such as the military-industrial complex or companies seeking to take advantage of resources in other parts of the country, or what have you. So they both felt like you need to have Congress more involved before the president is able to take any military action. Randall Terry had a different take. He felt like this was tying the hands of the president too much, and we had to give him more leeway. In particular, this came out when they were talking about this recent decision of the Supreme Court that Donald Trump and presidents in general had some immunity from prosecution for their acting within the core functions of their office, Chase Oliver and Jill Stein saw this more as an open door to the abuse of the office to commit crimes without any kind of consequences, whereas Randall Terry said that the idea that you may end up prosecuting presidents for war crimes was going to inhibit them from being able to act on the benefit of the United States, that you had to in some way give them a benefit of the doubt and allow them a free hand to take what action they think is important. So again, surprisingly maybe, the Libertarian and the Green Party candidates were closer together than they were to the Constitution Party candidate. The final foreign policy segment here had to do with economic sanctions as a tool of foreign policy rather than the use of military power. So let's listen to that one.
Yes, I support the use of sanctions because it would be better than shooting. If we can use the dollar to leverage something. But again, my problem is human rights. So we've got Iran that we're using sanctions against. They're the devil. We've got Saudi Arabia that's our partner. They're Beelzebub. Literally, if you look at the oppression of human rights in Saudi Arabia, it's probably worse than Iran. Our foreign policy needs to be based on human rights, not deep water ports, not oil, not so-called American interests that are economic.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of sanctions, and here's why. When we sanction a government, that doesn't really hurt the big people. That doesn't hurt the money movers and the influencers. That hurts the average person. When we sanction Russia, Vladimir Putin did not suffer. Trust me, he still has plenty of wealth and influence in his country. The people who suffered from those sanctions are the individuals in Russia, those who cannot no longer get along because their economic picture has been crushed by our sanctions. So no, I don't view that as a moral tool for foreign policy. We should be engaging in free and fair trade and market cooperation. Why? Because when we trade with people, we export freedom.
The U.S. currently has sanctions against something like 1/3 of the world's population. And this is not a good thing for our image and for our respect in the world. We are bringing great misery and hardship to so many people. It's tens of thousands, I believe, that have been documented in Venezuela who were killed largely due to starvation with the sanctions against Venezuela. I think there are very unusual circumstances. Sanctions were used against South Africa and were helpful ultimately in overturning the apartheid state in South Africa. And likewise now, there's a call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in Israel because there is a massive genocide. 500,000 people are at risk for starvation this month alone, and these are largely women and children.
All right, here, again, they had somewhat different takes. With Randall Terry, he felt that sanctions were good if they're used for the right purposes. He felt they should be used for protecting human rights, particularly the rights of children, and in which case you would feel like any promotion of abortion abroad was a bad thing to do, that we should be using sanctions rather to protect children from that and for other kinds of protections of human rights. With Chase Oliver, he felt that sanctions were really hurting the general population and not the political powers. The usual justification for sanctions hurting people is that they will rise up and replace or vote against the people in power, but in a lot of countries it doesn't work that way. So his position was that it hurts people, so he didn't like the use of sanctions. It didn't hurt the government to change their policies, it hurts the people that have to suffer most from the sanctions. And Jill Stein, she said that in general she agreed that sanctions were not always effective, but they should be used in cases such as South Africa or Israel, where our economic power could be an influence in helping stop the abuse of populations within other countries or other territories in the world. All right, finally, they sum up their positions in their final statements. Their statements were around 2 minutes each, and I've cut it down a little bit to about 1 minute each to make it a little more succinct. So let's hear what they finally had to say about why they're running for office of the presidency.
I'm a libertarian because I know deep down that there are so many things that we can do so much better if we remove government from the process. That government is inefficient, government is violent, and government is terrible. And in so many areas of our economy, human flourishing could be so much more quickly achieved if we got government out of the way. So I'm running for office because I want to put the ideas out there of limited government, of individual human rights, and the fact that we can organize ourselves free from government influence and the monopoly of force that government provides, and do a better job of it. That is a powerful message that so many Americans need to hear right now, because they are being indoctrinated from both the left and the right that the government must be the solution for them. The government is not the solution. We are the solution. Our individual communities are the solution, and our God-given human rights are the solution. And so I'm running for office to challenge the two-party system, to tear it down brick by building up an independent party that's independent of the two-party system, piece by piece. That's what I want to do. I want Americans to know they are not limited with two terrible, old, broken choices. We do not have to listen to politicians of the 20th century to find solutions for the 21st.
This is definitely an historic moment, and we're seeing crises that we have never seen before. Between the endless wars, the genocide abroad, the crushing inequality in this country, which gets greater by the day, climate collapse, and the assault on democracy in so many ways. In virtually every dimension of our lives, people are facing crisis, and the need for deep systemic change has never been so urgent, and the possibility of that change has never loomed so large, because people are not going to sit here and take it. The war abroad goes hand in hand with the war at home and the war on democracy. They need to be solved together because they are joined at the hip.
My mission is simple: defend children, defeat the Democrat nominee, and to destroy the Democrat Party. How do we destroy the Democrat Party? The largest single voting bloc inside the Democrat Party is Roman Catholics. The second largest voting bloc is African Americans. Both of these communities say that they are pro-life. They want to protect children. And yet, because of momentum over historic connections, we have people that know better that are voting for Democrats. The purpose of our campaign is to run television ads, because we are a federal campaign. We can run ads inside the 60-day window that say, this is what you're voting for if you vote for the Democrat nominee. This is what the Democrat Party stands for: the abuse of children, the killing of children, the molestation, the mutilation of children. The Democrat Party is literally in league with hell. It is a fortress of evil. It is a fountain of malice against children, and it must be destroyed.
And there you heard it. Chase Oliver feels like by running as a Libertarian candidate with what he regards as a compelling message, you can build up a party that's independent of the two major parties, and presumably at some point, a brick-by-brick process, as he put it, they could overtake one of the parties. And Jill Stein, she also, she didn't specify exactly why she was running, but it came down to her sense that all these problems in the world that our country faces are interrelated, and that the people need to join together, presumably behind her campaign or one like it, to take the control of government away from major corporate interest and use it for the benefit of our people here in the United States. And Randall Terry saying that his main reason for running was to destroy the Democratic Party, which he regards as having malice towards children in a number of areas of policy, and that what he wants to do is take votes away from the Democrats by attracting Roman Catholics and African Americans who have strong views about abortion that are not in line with the Democratic Party. He felt he could take those votes away from it and in that way destroy it. And he didn't seem too interested in getting them to vote for the Constitution Party as so much as just getting them not to vote for the Democratic Party, which would presumably benefit the Republican Party more than the Constitution Party. So that was their reasons for doing this. Now, my own position, as I said in my earlier episode, really is not exactly with any of them. I'm probably closer to Jill Stein than any of them. But I do agree with Chase Oliver that government can have too much power and be abused very easily, no matter who you try to put in charge of it. But I don't agree with him that by just removing government, you're going to have a better world. As Jill Stein said, you still have corporate power, and that would be perpetuating a lot of the problems. Her solution was rather to use the power of the government for the people to come together and use the power of the government to take it back from these private corporations and their private interests. There, I see this as an endless battle to try to regulate and control capitalism when it will always push back and have greater resources than we do in terms of time, energy, money in particular, to use government to their own advantage. So I think there has to be an agenda there of switching to a system that's not capitalist. Then you can start to dismantle the government and create a different type of society where there's greater human freedom and well-being. Finally, Randall Terry, he's got such a moralistic outlook that I'm not entirely in sync with. I sympathize with him in some sense that I do think moral values are important, but not only the way he applies them to particular issues and how he's really just out to destroy the Democratic Party. I would like to see the two-party system in general be defeated somehow. And as long as we've got different parties doing this in different ways, I'm not sure how far this is going to advance. But I did want to give you a flavor of what these candidates are about, and I hope I did that, and also give you my perspective just so you know if I've had any comments that seem biased or if I'm chuckling at moments that don't seem appropriate. It's because I have a different point of view and I see things differently than each of them. And that's it. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate those of you who have commented or liked the videos or subscribed, and the one person who has become a new Patreon member. I appreciate that very much for your financial support. So I will probably Sunday be putting up another episode. This one, my usual update on how these independent candidates, of course, the leading one being Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'll get back to what's happening with him, tell you what's happening in terms of their campaigns, and take a look at the many events this week involving the major parties. I won't be focusing on that a lot, but I do have to mention it and how it may affect the minor party candidates. So I hope you can come back and have a listen to that one as well. Thanks again for watching.